Thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we're just going to get started. So welcome. This is our Think Global, Act Local. We're going to talk about human rights, a lot of inequities and social injustices. This is kind of our round robin to really talk about a lot of the issues that we see today. But before we get started, I do want to recognize that we are on stolen land. The land that we are on here in the United States, specifically within Connecticut, is a part of the Pequannock, the Tungus, the Puxatawny, the River Tribes, the Podunk, the Wagunk, and the Algonquin tribes, which you can see here in the blue section. So if you would like to learn more, we are having another event next Sunday that specifically focuses on Native and Indigenous experiences. So I just want to recognize that we are on stolen land. And now I'm going to head into our short film snippet. We're going to kind of learn about some upcoming terms within some of the human rights realm and also globally. And we're going to learn about what glocal is. We're going to watch like roughly the first 5 minutes or so, since it is a bit longer. And I will have closed captions on. They are in English, but if you'd like, I can send you the link and they can appear in other languages. Alrighty. Let me go back to the beginning. There we go.
Hi, my name is Jen, and I am a global. Now, a lot of you will be sitting there wondering, what the heck is a global? And you're right to wonder. I sometimes even wonder myself, and I'm up here talking about it. Because right now, it's an idea in my mind. It's a lifestyle I believe I'm leading, and I believe many other people are leading, but they don't have a word to define it. I don't have a set guideline, a set of rules, a step-by-step set of instructions for you on being a global. But what I have is an idea. Many of you might be familiar with the word globalization. This is a word used by business to describe the process by which they assimilate. They adapt their products and their services to appeal to the needs and, more importantly, the wants of local communities and societies to boost sales and increase profits. I want to take this word back. I want to take it back and redefine it. I want to turn it from something that's about profit and consumerism and turn it into something far more powerful. I want to define global as the global local. Individuals who open themselves to the challenges that we're facing around the world, be daunted, be scared, but find the optimism that is necessary to act in the face of those challenges. Paul Coelho once said, every person on the planet plays a central role in the history of the world. I believe he was right. We all need to see ourselves, individuals, and our communities as spheres of change. I've always believed in the local and the individual as spheres of change. However, I didn't grow up, nor did I spend my formative years in a small community. At the age of 11, I moved from London, Ontario to Oxford, England with my parents. I spent my time there doing my high school. I did both of my degrees in London, and I took every opportunity I had to travel, to adventure, to expose myself to as many different societies, different cultures as I possibly could, and learn as much as I possibly could about what fascinated me most, which was human and environment interaction and how to change the world for the better. I believe that it was my 15 years in England, traveling abroad, that allowed me to create the lifestyle that I see as being a global citizen. I always thought big, dreamt big. I spent as much time as I possibly could getting involved in social and environmental responsibility projects, and they inspired me to start my own film company to showcase these projects. I traveled around the world believing that mass communication of the mission and the vision of these people and these groups was the way to instigate global change. I still believe this, but I believe it is just one tool in a toolbox that we have to change the world. At that time, when I was living there, and even up to a year ago, I wouldn't necessarily have defined myself as a global. As I said, I dreamt big. I took part and led several international expeditions around the world, and the latest one, which you heard, I sailed across the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, as part of a crew of 14 women, on a mission to make the unseen see, from the plastics and toxics in our oceans, those in our own bodies. Now, when I signed up, I had never sailed before. So, as much as the experience was exciting, it was hugely daunting. But it wasn't nearly as frightening as the issue we were highlighting. The presence and proliferation of plastics and toxics in the ocean. These little microplastics acting as sponges for toxics and chemicals that harm wildlife and through the food chain eventually lead to detrimental human health. As part of this trip and this journey, I have to admit, hands up, before I signed up, I actually had no idea about plastics and toxics in the ocean. And this was pretty shocking to me, considering I had spent much of my time and believed myself to be incredibly knowledgeable about human and environmental harm. So I struggled when I first signed up. I was excited about the trip. I've always been excited about adventure, but I became extremely dismayed to learn about this actual issue. I felt disheartened. I felt scared. But instead of turning away, I tried to open myself up, to allow myself to accept that this problem exists, and that maybe, just maybe, me and this crew and whoever else followed us and might get involved could change the world. This was a big project. It was global. We had an international team. It was a global problem that demanded global solutions. And I'm extremely proud of what we've done. We sailed across the ocean, we collected research, we have published papers, we have disseminated our research. I was the filmmaker on the team, so I produced a feature-length documentary, which has been shared far and wide. Hopefully we'll continue to do so. But most importantly for me, I think the most powerful thing that has come out of this project and out of this trip was seeing and experiencing local action because of what we did. How did I experience this local action? Well, 6 months before I set sail with my team, I moved. I moved from a global city, London, England, with a population of 8.3 million people, to just outside a little village in southwestern Ontario, Bayfield, with a population year-round just shy of 1,000. I had an opportunity. Why did I move? I had an opportunity, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, to set up an environmentally friendly outdoor recreation park. For someone like me, whose life is based around adventure, getting outdoors, encouraging others to do the same, it was too perfect. I couldn't pass up this opportunity. But it wasn't an easy process. Moving from somewhere that had been home, where I had grown up, where I had networks, I had used it as my base for change, how I believed I was going to contribute to the world, and I had no idea what I was heading into. What was going to be there? Was there even going to be people who thought the same, who cared, who were open? And I was nothing but surprised when I moved there. What I found instead was a community of locals. I found people who were not only open to the issues I was talking about, the things I cared about, plastics in the ocean, poverty, whatever it was. Not only were they open, but they experienced and understood these problems as not only out there, but right here. Plastics are a perfect example. They're not just out there in the oceans, they are here in the Great Lakes. They are here in our backyard. And my next project is exploring the Great Lakes, plastics and toxics. But what these people showed me is that not only were they open to these issues, understood that they exist, were scared by them, but they were willing to act. And they acted with guts and optimism and energy. Optimism is key. It's a hard thing to find. I'm only human.
All right, we're gonna pause here. So she goes on, and it's a really interesting TED Talk. I think Thomas, you sent this one to me. It was excellent. So thank you so much. If you want to check out that link, feel free to see the full presentation. And in that YouTube one, there are the documentaries as well on a plastic ocean. There's quite a few documentaries on how the fish eat the little plastics that come from our water bottles. It's fascinating. So before we head into our conversation, just a quick reminder, we want to establish common ground so that we can all feel safe, confident, and comfortable in our conversations. So speak from your own experience, listen to understand one another's experiences instead of just constantly responding, saying like, oh, maybe they'll like my answer if I respond in a way that they like, instead of being honest with who you are and your opinion. Lean into your discomfort or feelings. Confidentiality, basically all of the shared stories stay, but the lessons that we learn go out into the community. We're being respectful. That's just staying muted while other people are talking, or just typing in the chat. We have a lovely chat feature that you can use to enter questions, comments, or continue the conversation. And now I say challenge by choice. The more you participate and pour into this conversation, the more that you're going to get out of it and learning from one another. And finally, agree to disagree, which I love to do quite a bit with some of my family members. We all can't agree on everything, whether it's political, social, emotional. It's fine. Like we can just agree saying, you know what, we have different perspectives, but I can be graceful and I can be kind about it. I can still be respectful and not hate someone for having a different opinion. We all are coming from different places, and that's how we can still have a great conversation with one another. So today we are talking a lot about different human rights issues. You'll see that we did start to talk about kind of a global and local, or glocal as we call it, issue with plastic. And that's one of the many issues that are going on in our world. There's a lot of them. So today we're really gonna reflect on what we can do about it in our community and have a great conversation about potential solutions, or maybe even thinking about like what are some of the issues in our community. So really having a great conversation today about it. And you'll see that when we're talking about inequality, there's a lot of different types of inequality here with human rights. So I have a quote here saying, when the political power of the elites expands as the income and wealth distribution becomes more polarized, this compromises the entire range of human rights, because this comes from putting the money where your mouth is and where your actions are. All right, so this presentation is actually put together by all the commissioners. We all did great research and great things here to add into it. Judge, you wanna share out?
Yeah, I just want to say and recognize that today is actually National Human Rights Day.
Woohoo!
To honor the Declaration of Human Rights that was set down by the United Nations, courtesy or with the assistance of Eleanor Roosevelt. That we took a field trip to her home a couple years ago.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and speaking of human rights, that gets right into our first topic of like, what is human rights? A lot of social justice and inequalities are talking about human rights, and a lot of this varies from country to country and from local politics and rights and global issues. So you'll see here there are links throughout the presentation if you'd like to check them out. There's a great link here that talks about 8 rights and responsibilities of the global citizen and how we can make the world a better place. So throughout our conversation, really bring up, what does human rights mean to you? What does it mean to your community? So just some food for thought to keep thinking about, because it can change over time. So the first thing we have are local human rights issues, and this list is not exhaustive. Let me tell you, these are just some of the ones that have been at the forefront or at the back front of the news. And so these are just a couple, just to name a few. We have the housing crisis in the local level, environmental justice, gang violence, microaggressions in the workplace and in the community space, the work culture in America, the kind of continuously grinding, away with work, the decision for Roe v. Wade, the implications that it has at the local level for healthcare accessibility and what it means for women or femme-defining people who are trying to get access or not, and the healthcare system inequalities, educational inequalities, social, emotional, and mental health. These are all just a couple of local issues that happen within the Windsor community, including gun control. So these are just a few. I'm going to name each one of these, and then we're going to talk about them in our conversation. So this is at the local level. At the national level, which again, like Connecticut is one of the 50 states. We're a part of this United States of America. And at the national level, these are just a couple, just to name a few. Again, not exhaustive. We have a lot of large systems of oppression. The ones highlighted in media include gender, race, class, ability, including neurodiversity, body size, age, religion, etc., etc. We also have violence based off of an identity that you could hold. Healthcare, and a lot of these you'll see from the local. These are also national issues. You'll see that there are a lot of different protests, a lot of different forms of action that come along the way. So just seeing how we move from the local to the national. And then finally to the global one level. When we get to the global level of human rights issues, we can continue to see how violence escalates, whether it is with the LGBTQ plus community, the BIPOC, neurodiverse women's community, the war with Ukraine, how that impacts the economy and inflation, nuclear weapons, the potential World War III that people kind of elusively talk about here and there in global politics, and especially income inequality is with people's educational levels. So again, just to name a few at each of the levels. So we're going to pause here and then start our conversation about, well, what can we do about this? Are there any issues that kind of stood out to you, and how can we take action? So I'll pause here, and if anyone wants to jump in, let me know. Okay. I'm going to stop my screen share so we can all look at each other's lovely faces if you like. If you don't want to have your face up, that's totally fine. Go ahead.
Hey, Cass. One issue that I think that is local, well as statewide and global, is affordable housing. And I'm happy to see that Windsor is doing something about that by the new, and I know our liaison is very much involved in that, and making sure that affordable housing is getting a kickoff in Windsor, because that is a detriment, not only in Windsor, but statewide and national. So I'm glad to see that something is in the works and getting done with that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, including some of the federal loans, the CFHA loans. And the only reason I know is because I'm like slowly starting to look at houses too, but it is very interesting with the job market, everything that you're saying. So for the housing market, thanks for sharing. James, you want to go next, and then Becky?
No, I'm just listening. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you had your hand. I was like,
No. Honored.
Thank
you, though.
You want to go ahead?
Sorry, I'm at my job while I try and listen in. I think one of the best ways we can. What was the question again?
Just talking about any local, national, or global issues, kind of what stands out to you recently in the news, any ideas on what we can do about it?
One of the things that stands out strongest to me in the news, and it just came to my mind because there was somebody who had no clue what I was talking about. Like, I have a sticker on my purse and it's an angry looking uterus and it says, leave me alone. And she's like, what does that stand for? I was like, well, it's a uterus and it says, leave me alone, because the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And she goes, what's that? And I like, and I was like, the only things I could think of were like, are you living under a rock? Like you appear to be, you appear to, have you present as female, and how do you not understand this? And like, I just kept my lip zipped and walked away.
Like, do you not have a uterus?
Yeah. even if you don't have a uterus, how do you not know this decision? Like, are you living under a rock? And I think I feel like there's no, she had to have been late teens, early 20s. And I don't feel like there's a good way to disseminate information these days. Like, it's not that many people watch network news anymore. And, if all you do is watch TikTok, and nobody ever plays the news, I guess maybe you could not know what's going on. And I feel like we need a more concise, reliable news source. And that seems stupid for me to say, because I'm always like, Alexa, play Associated Press updates for me. Alexa, give me an NPR news update. Like, and I can get like there needs to be a quicker and more concise way for people to do it. And that sounds ridiculous when we live in an age where like information is thrown at us all the time. But clearly there's people it is not reaching.
Yeah, especially on TikTok. I've had to talk about this, like as a former teacher, I've had to talk a lot with students about like satire and then they're like, well, satire is a part of facts, right? And I'm sitting here like, no, satire is like a part of the way that we make fun of the news. That's not the news itself, but that's something that we're like people within my age bracket, just speaking from experience, where it's like, you're taking like comedic, like political news as facts. And it's just kind of like, but it's not true. Like, but it's how do we communicate that? So like preaching to the choir, Becky, like I totally feel you on that. Yeah.
I have a 15-year-old that listens to like, he'll listen to news clips, but it's stuff, like he's looking up, and I'll find it on, YouTube or, any of his boards. And then he'll like start to repeat the stuff. And I'm like, that's not accurate, right? And he's like, no, they said it. And I was like, no. Like, we've worked on this whole critical thinking thing where like, you can there's a million different ways to verify this information, and you cannot just take what somebody says at face value. And I have to go over it and over it and over it again. It is terrifying as a parent.
Oh, yes, I can only imagine. Well, thank you for sharing, Becky. Thomas, did you want to share?
Yeah, so Judge, first I'm going to call you out. Did you just assume her gender?
I did. And I thought about that after I responded. It was just like somebody's going to catch me on that. My commissioners are swift. Thank you.
I'm going to stay on you for just a moment. Because you and I were both of an age group that we listened and watched Walter Cronkite on the news every night. No spin, no BS, just the facts. And honestly, there is no media outlet out there today that does that. So kids, and they're very active in social media. I shouldn't even just say kids, because I am. And I've got grandkids now who are, well, no, he's not quite on social media yet, but it's coming. That's to get honest news without any bias today is next to impossible.
Yes.
Unless you're willing to go out and do the research for yourself. So this is a lot of what Becky was saying. We get, whether you watch CNN, you watch Fox, OAN, which I don't think I've ever watched or followed, but either way, they're getting their news from 10-second looks at, memes on Facebook or tweets, and none of it's being moderated, or at least none of it's being moderated for accuracy. And that's a problem.
Right, agreed. And Thomas and Becky, do you all believe, how do you constantly have to tell people what is real and what is not? You know, it's a hard line when you have to discern, is this true what you're telling me, that the world is going to end in 1 hour, you know, versus, you know, it's like that whole, you know, thing of, you know, crying wolf. What is real? What is reality? And I think people are so confused. Those that try to follow media and information sources, they never realize what is authentic and what is not.
No, this is very true. And it's
just
very
like
much a
Becky,
problem.
it's like Becky said with her son, you know, she had to ask him, you do know that's not real, right? You know, and as adults, we have to ask that question too, to ourselves. Is that real or is that fake?
I mean, you know, my 15-year-old is like, you know, is a teenager on the spectrum, and like this is something he's got to learn. But I've been shouting from the rooftop for years. I mean, like, you know, back in 2013, 2014, people would, you know, post crap on the internet, you know, politics or whatever, and I'd be like, you know, you can go to factcheck.org, or you know, you can go to like this site or that site, you know, have you Snopes? Did you check Snopes for this? And no matter what you say, somebody's going to go, well, there's a bias there one way or the other. And I'm just like, look, I'm just saying there's stuff out there that you can fact check this with. And please don't post this crap on the internet, you know, disseminating information when, you know, you can't verify it. It just sounds like something you agree with. That doesn't mean it's correct. And I think we're all guilty of that. I mean, like, you know, we've all shared memes where we're like, yeah, that sounds about right. And, you know, you'll share it. But I try and check myself 99% of the time and just be like, well, let me just double check this.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's like, there's no way to eliminate bias itself, because bias is going to happen whether it's positive or negative. And then you can do your best, but at the same time, it's like, we're only human, like, and there's times where it's like, know your audience, know the context, and see if you have access to understand the critical thinking piece. Because like you're saying, like, everyone developmentally is in different places. Do you have access to be able to like disseminate, saying like, okay, like, this is garbage, but like, it's funny, so maybe with my friends we can have a conversation about it, and this is a great space. Whereas maybe in class, if you were to send that to your teacher, maybe that's not the best decision to do that when you're like in a school setting, or whether you're in like a religious setting. So it's starting to learn the social cues that aren't really like, I don't want to say they're not taught anymore, but it kind of falls on the teacher to like, you know, to teach them that social cues, and the parents to teach them that social cues. And the like, how are we really supporting the next generation and the current generation with technology? Like, can you like access memes? I had to explain to like people in the silent generation what a meme was, and they're like, I don't understand. And after I explained it, they're like, can you do that one more time? Like, this doesn't make sense how like memes are used as a communication tool, like whether it's to be funny or educational or make a point, you know, like things are constantly changing. Emojis as well, like, you know, how you can send like 6 emojis and like that's a sentence, and it's kind of like, but what happened to words?
and you know, Cassie, that also, and team, that also speaks to the issues of political. You know, we have independents, Republicans, and Democratic, and I'm so blessed that we have a little bit of everything on this commission now. It used to be strongly Democratic, and I'm just loving the diversity of the commission.
And we love it too.
And it's just like, you know, you really don't know, you know, depending on the party, what's coming out of that, what's true, what's not, what's good, what's bad. And it didn't used to be that way, where it's so convoluted and all the junk in all these political parties. And I'm not trying to get political here, but it's all this junk out of all these political parties that you have to contend with and think about, you know, to make a good decision of what's good, what's not, what's fair, what's not, what's fake, what's not.
Yeah.
And that with generational differences, the young versus the old, you know, what Thomas and I may be a different brain cell from what Cassie and James think, and Becky and Linda, you know, generational, there's a generational valley there. And you know, what works for one generation may not work for another, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we talk to our children, our grandchildren, you know, having a conversation with parents, to teachers, to, you know, educators, it's all a big blob of mess now. And it used to not be that way, especially when I was growing up. It used to not be so convoluted, but it has become that way. And I will really, you know, like if I went down the rabbit hole, I could find the reason why it has gone that way, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, for sure, especially with the way that political parties are even taught in the school system. I'll never forget when one of my friends in my generation said, oh, so here's how history works with political parties. You know, the Republicans back in the day were really like modern day Democrats. And I'm just sitting here, I'm like, so you're using like the word in the definition to explain the concept. It's kind of like, can you tell me the definition of the word think, but not use the word think in a sentence, but then they would do that anyways. So it's things like that where it's like my generation was taught, well, this party used to be like this party and vice versa. And here's how we get to today in like a very simplified terms. But then it's like when you look back at the history and like to really understand, it's like, how are we communicating even across generations? I identify as like independent, which is cool and all, but like even one of my friends who's like a Democrat, and then there's an older Democrat, and it's just like, how are you in the same party? And it's
Right.
like completely different beliefs. Like it's just It's really interesting, like you said, that there's that generational difference.
Yeah.
Well, if I could jump in, there's a couple of things that are interesting here, right? One is, I used to do a lot of third-party politics, and you're going to get nothing done if you do third party. It's the way it is, right? And the reason is that we have a two-party system, but the reason we have a two-party system is we have a winners-takes-all voting system. In an election, if it's 49-51, the person who wins gets all of it, right? And in a winner-takes-all voting system, you will always have two parties. You can demonstrate this mathematically, right? And so don't blame the two-party system on anything other than the fact that we have a winner-takes-all voting system. And so you're going to have two parties. And the question becomes, how much can you influence those two parties? And so one of the things is, can you try to influence them heavily? And so I'm a libertarian. I believe in limited government on every issue. And I'm a moderate libertarian, which is limited government is not no government, is not anarchy, right? And so what's interesting is, as a libertarian, I disagree with both parties half the time, and I agree with both parties half the time. But unfortunately, if you want to get anything done, I used to be the chairman of the Libertarian Party of Connecticut. I was communication director for 3 years. I went to the national convention a couple of times, and it's fun. And you get to eat a lot of cake, and you get a lot of like-minded people, and you get nothing done electorally. So you have to work with one of the major parties in my mind. But what's interesting is to ask, how much can you influence one of the parties? And so, I mean, I've been in the local Republican Party only for a couple of years. I went pretty far to the right in the last couple of years, mostly because I want to see on the left, and it scares me. And so what's interesting, though, is how much you can influence the political parties. Because I was actually a delegate to the convention in Connecticut, and I'll probably be a delegate in convention next time around. That means I got to pick the senator and governor candidate, et cetera. Now, they're all going to lose in Connecticut, that's fine. But in 2024, I can help pick the presidential candidate, which I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure isn't Trump, because I think he's destructive to the Republican Party. But the question you have to ask is, back to the theme of this discussion, is, can you take actions that actually influence larger things? Local and global is the most extreme, but can you take action? And what's interesting is, after only 2 years of really being active with the Republican Party, I was able to actually become a delegate to the convention and pick our statewide candidates, not to mention run for office, which I'll do again. And Becky's probably going to run, is the rumor, for Board of Ed. So, you can actually influence the parties substantially. So it's just, as much as we're cynical about the parties, I always like to say to people who say that, go try to do it. Join a couple local commissions is always the first thing I say. First of all, so everyone on this call, right, you're doing one of the things. I say this at work all the time. At work, we post these things about, hey, make sure you get out and vote. I always respond, we got about 20 commissions in almost every town in this state. Go join one. And I said, once everybody knows your name, they're going to hook in for everything they possibly can. Kevin does it better than anybody, right? But it's amazing how much you really can influence the political process. And I'm talking from a person on the party that has no power in this state. Like, if you can get in with the Democrats, you can influence even more. So just a thought there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, especially with the actionable piece. It's like, it really does start local, because like people aren't taught about like the local. I know, like, especially like with my education for public education, it's like we're taught about like the national and global level for politics, but then like what about the local? Well, how does that even work? Like, how do you become like, you know, on the board of ed? How do you become a part of these local Democrat, Republic, independent, or third parties? I remember I had a recent discussion with the National Black Cooperative about this, and it was fascinating because all of us were like, I can't recall a time where that was a part of our education, where we really like honed in on like, this is what you can do for local politics, and this is how you get to the national level, instead of just, you know, it's not like a magic wand and poof, you're in the national level. It's like, no, you work your way up, but people aren't taught, especially like I know in my education, I had to learn like in college, like, oh, that's how the local politics works. Why didn't anyone tell me? I didn't realize it's kind of, you know, one step, other step. And that kind of goes to the education system and how we hold each other accountable for understanding things. It's kind of like, why did it take me to be a young adult to understand this stuff, when really this can be embedded within social studies or even like mathematics? You're saying like you could statistically calculate that, like there's a blending of concepts and like
Right.
I'll get off the high horse. I know, Thomas, you want to share?
Oh, no, I'm going to agree with you first. One of my favorite classes in junior high school was civics. And it should be taught to every student. They should understand how their government works. And then going back to James's point, just in the last couple of days, evidently, Congressman or Congresswoman or Senator Sinema just decided that she was leaving the Democratic Party and she's going to become an independent. And honestly, if you look at her voting record, it makes sense. Although she's voted 93% with the Democratic Party since she's been elected. And there's this huge outrage that she just got elected and now decides to leave the Democrat Party to become an independent. And people voted for her because she was a Democrat. That's the problem. Why are you voting for somebody because of their party over their ideals or over their beliefs, their policies? And we need, and this is, again, it goes back to James, and I get it, we're a two-party system, winner takes all. But that system has led us to such extremes that people no longer look at the person, but what party they affiliate with. And now I'm going to get off my soapbox and
no, but that's a great point. And like to Judge's point earlier, it's kind of like, that's why on the commission we have such diversity, so that it's not just like this lopsided thing. We have it, and we try to make it more about these ideals and more about like, this is what, like, we're making it more about the actions instead of just being like, oh, see, like we're the Democrats or we're the Republicans. It's like, that's the value of having diverse ideology and thought, which people don't really consider anymore or even get scared of. I know that like in the educational system as well, anytime we have these conversations, they get shut down. Like I'll never forget like when Obama was elected in 2008, and like I was in 8th grade and stuff. There were certain classes where it's like, oh, you can only talk about this in social studies if you have X amount of adults monitoring the conversation, because we can't get too political in school. But then like that's a part of the civics conversation. So like, how am I going to learn to critically think, to engage when these are constantly being shut down, whether it's with like critical race theory? Oh, but that's like a tool, but we can't use that. Oh, but I want to talk about politics so I know how I can communicate better with others. No, this is school.
No, not allowed.
Things like that, where I'm like, how are we supposed to teach the next generation to use applicable skills, you know, not just with social studies, but even with math and like other curriculum, when that's it, and again, it varies from school to school and from district and state and all that stuff. But how are we supposed to move forward and teach them practical skills in high school when we have all of these barriers? And this kind of goes again into globally as well, as like who has access to these conversations, to understanding them, to practicing.
Well, you know what, Cassie, and we had a whole discussion. I think you were a member, you were a commissioner then, or
Yes.
had just come up with critical race theory.
Oh, yeah.
We had that conversation, and I for the life of me, I can't wrap around in my head, why is there such an argument over critical race theory and racism? It's a fact of life that we as Americans have experienced that. This country was built on slavery and being enslaved. And why can't we have the discussion that talks about the experiences of the underprivileged? It just baffles me why this is so contentious.
Oh, absolutely. And it's
I don't understand that. You know, this is stuff that actually happened in our past. Not saying we have to live this in our present or our future. We need to move forward and not keep living in the past, but from what happened in the past. And why can't we as adults and teach our children, you know, these things that happened in our past? Why limit you to what you need to learn in civics class? Why limit you to what you need to learn in social studies?
Yeah.
I think some people underestimate the minds and thoughts of children, because they, in some instances, they can see it better than we can.
Yeah.
Other,
I think one of the biggest problems, like when people have had these discussions, is not that they disagree, but people seem unable to disagree like empathically. We've lost the language of empathy. And if we disagree, like, you know, it's balls to the wall, and, you know, there's no, I mean, I don't think there's much of a middle ground in things that to me are human rights, racism and, you know, sexism, but even when those discussions don't meet in the middle, we've lost the ability to disagree empathically and speak to other people like they're human beings. And to me, that's one of the biggest problems. It's not that we constantly disagree, it's that we can't seem to disagree without ripping each other apart.
and I think you're exactly right, Becky. I mean, there is no more civil discussion. I mean, I'm a Republican. I'm not going to be ashamed of it. I am what I am.
And you have no reason to be ashamed of that.
Exactly.
Thomas.
Yeah.
There's no
the
reason
moment
for anybody to be ashamed of their affiliation with anybody. But just like the six of us are here, we can have a discussion.
But the moment I go on to a social media site like webpage or the Facebook, Twitter, and I push call out, somebody from the opposite party, and I say, hey, you're wrong. Now I'm a racist. Or now I'm a Nazi. And it's that division that's been, promoted by, and I'm not going to blame just the Democrats. I'm not going to blame the Republicans. It's both parties. Both parties have been driven to extremes.
Yeah.
And there's no more civil discourse between the two. And that's what we need to fix.
But Thomas, do you think that has happened as of late? Because I don't.
No, it's not.
And growing up, I didn't see this muddled mess that we have nowadays. This just happened within, for me to notice, within the past about 15 years.
I was going to say it probably goes back to about Clinton.
Yeah.
The last two political leaders in the United States from opposite parties that honestly would work together, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. They would blast each other on stage all day long. And at the end of the day, they'll sit down, have a beer, and discuss it.
Right.
And honestly, I mean, I'm not saying it's Biden. I'm not saying it was Trump. I'm not saying it was Obama. I mean, this goes back, but there has been this steady increase of the divide between parties, and they're
But-
both going to their respective extremes.
But don't you think that has a lot to do with the rise of the internet? I mean, like, the
Yeah.
Clinton's presidency correlates with, like, the internet becoming popular and becoming this worldwide thing, and things that we would have previously probably never said to people to their faces, we're all now okay with saying to each other, like, behind a screen, when we can't, like, say anything to each other, and tone isn't taken into consideration, and all these other things. I mean, like, people always used to joke, like, oh, we just don't discuss politics because we're not going to agree. And that was fine because you didn't want to rip somebody, like,
Yeah, you didn't want to get punched in the
acquaintance
face.
yeah, be they an acquaintance or a friend, you didn't want to sit there and fight with people. So, like, you could just say, well, we agree to disagree, or, if we have a discussion, it's polite, maybe we can meet halfway. That doesn't happen now because everybody's a screen warrior, like behind a computer screen where you don't, like, see anybody else, you don't know their circumstances, what's led them to become one way or the other, and and then we all just rip each other a new one, and it's chaos.
Yeah, you can't reach out and punch them in the eye.
Yeah,
Can I make a few
no,
observations, though?
yeah.
So
The anonymity of the internet is definitely, I'm not going to say it causes it, but it doesn't help.
yeah. So can I make some observations, though? I don't think the country is as divided as most people think. Right? I'm extremely optimistic about the trend of the United States in humanity, because I would observe that if we have the luxury of sitting around as people talking about very advanced societal issues, you notice we haven't said one thing on this call about poverty, lack of access to education. I mean, we are a phenomenally rich country, and so are the majority of countries in the world. If you measure by historical standards, you go back 100 years, you look at the death, the disease, the short lifespans, we are shockingly wealthy. So the very fact that our entire society, even people who are relatively poor, are so effectively elite that we have the time and energy, even among relatively humble brackets of society, to have these kind of discussions tells you, wow, you're doing really good. Nobody's actually going really deep into those scary issues. And so the other thing to observe is the political parties are way more aligned than you think. And the reason I know this is I'm a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. I believe anything can run amok, right? But I'm very scared of Marxism. I believe Marxism has a long history of destruction in society. But there are some very strong Marxist groups out there, and I listen to them carefully. I watch their streams so that I can understand the perspective. And if you want to see how good capitalism is doing, listen to Marxists. They'll tell you, well, capitalism's taken over the world, and the corporate world has both parties under control. Let us grant them their assertions, because I like that, right? That's really saying something. Both parties are heavily unified behind corporate America. Anyone deny that? They're both heavily unified behind the military-industrial complex. Anyone deny that? They're both unified behind the notion of intervening in other countries and overthrowing even democratic governance. Anyone deny that? So the two parties are actually shockingly well aligned. So what's fascinating about how society is being manipulated, and I say this as someone who likes our state of society, I think we actually have a really functioning society, right? We are largely agreed on most of the things that both parties will do. There's a minutia here that we all fight about, but that minutia is nothing. Now, when you get everybody focused on that minutia, we all look like we hate each other. But nobody's arguing about this. When was the last time you said anything on the far left or right where they used to be their major issues? We're not disagreeing on those. So what's interesting, I think we're far more in agreement than anyone thinks. And I think it's the media that's causing the divide. The reason is I go back to 2012, when the New York Times was bought out by a foreign country, and they broke down the wall between journalism and profit. And they started becoming effectively clickbait for the educated elite. Right about that time, all of the truckers and the construction workers who listened to radio all day started listening to nothing but they're all media. We're listening to two different bodies of information. So we look like we're fighting about it. Meanwhile, the military-industrial complex, the corporate America, and all the machinery that's 98% of society, nobody's talking about that. We're just fighting over each other about a swimmer who used to be a guy. Like, that tells you something about how society is actually functioning. That's my observation.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting, especially when you're bringing up technology, to see how it plays. And it's like, yeah, that's a tool to disrupt, because who doesn't love a good conflict? And wait, that's profitable. But wait,
Yep.
It's also attractive to constantly be like, look at us,
Right.
we're in the news. Like, we have look at us, we have so many different things, when a homeless person in America is more well off than people in other impoverished areas, in other countries and other continents. And it's kind of like, even as a homeless person in America, you can get clean water in a lot of public areas, depending on your state, of course.
But if you can't, that's a problem. Yep.
But like, yeah, and like you're saying, it's just like a part of it is perspective, but a part of it, it's still kind of seeing the bigger picture, because we're taught to constantly nitpick at times, being like, oh my gosh, did you see her hair? Or, oh my gosh, did you see what that country is doing over
Right.
here? Oh, look at our country. We have all these Olympic medals. And if you actually look at the Olympics, what it's about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But people forget that. And it's like medal count. And it's just
Yep.
like, what are we turning
Exactly.
these things into? And how we're taking that small thing, like you're saying, James, and then we're starting to exacerbate it.
Yeah.
But also, like, how do we teach people about this? Because Judge, when you were talking about racism, and you too, Becky, I was thinking about Angela Davis's Race, Class, and Gender book, and she really talks about how racism is not beneficial for white people. And it's her whole argument against it was really interesting, because she was talking about how, like, it's only beneficial if you're like an elite white. For the rest of the people who are white, it's like, it's bad. It's counterintuitive. It places discrimination and bias on white people too, but people don't talk about that, because racism is jaded. It's multi-layered. There's colorism, there's discrimination against white people, and oh, do indigenous people even count? And oh wait, what about the black? So it's like so nuanced, but then, like, again, like, everyone focuses and nitpicks on all the things that you're focused on, all the pieces of dust, instead of seeing the environment and being like, well, what's causing that in the first place? Like, what is
your point is well taken and absolutely right. You know, there is discrimination against white people, but nobody talks about that.
Yeah.
They only see that as a African American, Latino, Asian issue. And there's more to it than that. And you know, and a lot of people would ask, who is the spokesperson for the underserved, underprivileged white person?
That's why I'm excited that White Working Class is our book. It's interesting, because that's exactly the point. Discrimination against class is way more pervasive. I think there's a correlation to certain groups.
Definitely.
Historically, there's a reason for there's a correlation historically, obviously, between certain groups and poverty. Okay, fine. But if you are poor and white, just like I said before, it's like, you know, those senators and those CEOs, 99% of, you know, white working class people aren't those people either. So,
but you know, James, the argument there is always, I hear, you know, if I ask the question, you know, what about the white people that are underprivileged? Well, they can change their situation, is the response I get. White people are easier to, the belief is, white people are easier to change their situation and get up out of the minutia of being underprivileged to move into a higher class easily than any other demographic.
That's fair. So it's harder to have two things working against you than one. It's harder to have three than four. If you're a trans black woman poor, right, it's harder than being white straight male poor. So I agree, but I would simply observe, yes, two things working against you is worse than one. We're not saying that there's not racism. I'm not saying it, right? Say racism like something else. It's harder to be black working class than white working class. It's true enough. But if you're a poor white person and you keep hearing how you have privilege because you're white and you're, you know, flipping burgers 12 hours a day so you can feed your kids, it's like there's a disconnect there. To say if you're working 12 hours a day flipping burgers to feed your kids and you're black, there certainly is, life is harder. Granted, and gay, female, whatever you want to put on the list. So yeah, we just got to add the class dimension. And that to me is back to one of the things that's being largely ignored both left and right. And this is why I say we're sitting here arguing over, you know, so K-3 curriculum over in Florida. It's like, yeah, but meanwhile, 40% of the life, you know, people in America are on the bottom.
Right.
They have mobility, for example, is one of my favorite questions. So that people are poor in a certain phase of their life is not nearly as interesting as whether there's economic mobility in a society. Right? And economic mobility is lower if you're black than if you're white.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about that. And that's why I'm such an advocate of education. That's why I'm so involved in the educational system. It's like education to me is the one thing we can do. And so now if you can get everybody access to education, education is one of the great liberators. Whereas I am on the right, and I do have a concern that welfare is a form of generational dependency. It's like it's a social safety net, but only education is going to get you out of it. If you're starving, yes, you want to get something on the table. But if you want to not have your next generation be starving, it's like, what can I get this? How can I get the skills that people are willing to pay for? That kind of thing. So the mobility question is a big part of my concern.
Oh yeah, and
then James, on that, and Tom, I'll let you make your comment. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
On that, James, is the aspect if I can be accepted if I'm a high school person going to high school. Will I be accepted to the Harvards and the Princetons and all these schools, these Ivy League colleges that would help me matriculate into a better life? You know, they're talking about getting away affirmative action, getting rid of affirmative action for these kids to go to these Ivy League colleges. So, considering the community that these children come from, are they going to be able to excel without affirmative action into these Ivy League schools to help themselves get up out of this, oh, I'm poor, underserved, underprivileged, and become the doctors, lawyers that we need today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Let me analogize it since we're local and global here. I know we're trying to go over to Tom, and I know Cassie has something too. But I'd be fascinated to go back. I think it came up with our group. I do so much in town, I don't know where it came up, but I think it was in our group. The fact that when we get the folks down the street, the prep school.
Loomis
Louis
Chafee.
Chafee?
Loomis Chafee, thank you.
Yeah.
When we invite Loomis Chafee to things with our high schoolers, sometimes there's some animosity from the high schoolers towards the Loomis Chafee kids. There's a feeling like, oh, they're the rich kids who are from out of town and we're dealing with them. And no, it must not have been with this group. It was, I think, came up in Board of Ed discussion or a coffee talk with Dr. Hill maybe. But it's like, there's some tension there. So the Harvard, Harvard for society is an interesting question. You brought that up, Kevin. But it's like, if we're going to deal with it, here's the question: Isn't Loomis Chafee basically the Harvard of Windsor? And if you're a kid living south end of Windsor, you're pretty much right. Why is there an animosity? Because I fear that there is a class divide. I don't necessarily want to make it about race yet, because my first listen, I grew up really blue collar and poor, right? I couldn't fit in at Harvard either. I swear too much, I have too much of an attitude, blah, 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 right? But it's like, and I have a little bit of that blue collar, kind of those snobby people, what the hell, I don't want to deal with them anyway, kind of attitude, right? So I can agree with that. How do we make sure that Loomis Chafee and our high schoolers don't have that kind of tension? Because I think that's the same tension that occurs between kids who have a rough background and the kids who go to Harvard because they all got in because of their connections, kind of thing. I don't know. It just seems like the same sort of thing.
Yeah, but you see that superiority between the Loomis Chafee kids and the Windsor High School kids.
Yeah.
I can see, I live over by Loomis Chafee. And if I'm at Geisler's on a Sunday and they're there too, you get the snobbery between those kids versus a Windsor High School student.
I know.
I know. That works there.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a lot of elitism, especially like and that's like and a lot of that ties James into like classism. And also when you're talking about real quick before I let you go, sorry, Thomas, but real quick, it was just, I was thinking about how with mobility and especially in education, there's something called pretty privilege. So if you look attractive, and a lot of that gets into white supremacy and all that kind of stuff as well. That's the only reason why I would bring more of a race into it. But like, even if you are a person of Black, Indigenous person of color, and if you are seen as attractive, now all of a sudden you will start to have more mobility with class and economic opportunities. But if you do not fit that, then all of a sudden it becomes very hard. And that's where, like, there's welfare as the safety net, but it shouldn't matter if you're pretty or ugly. And yet our society values, especially specifically like women and people from the LGBTQ community, like they're valued more based off of beauty standards, where it's like, if I were fat and I didn't make as much and I wasn't married at my age, people wouldn't want me to be their spokesperson. People wouldn't want to hire me as an educator. People wouldn't want to, they wouldn't value me. And it's really sad when it comes to that.
You named mostly weight with women, but it's also height with men. As a 5'9" male, I got to observe most CEOs are 6 feet and over. Most presidents are 6 feet and over. So there's a lot of biases. I mean, this goes back to, I just got sent to DEI training at work, and I loved it because in addition to all the normal reasons, this group actually talked about biases in general. And they didn't just talk about your identity trait type bias, but they talked about all manner of biases that we have, even on the job, even if you're hired, it doesn't matter. The things that we do, cognitive dissonance and all that stuff, and how it makes you think. But no, the notion of you're right. There's weight bias, there's beauty bias, there's height bias, and it's like those all come into account. And so there is the general category of how do you make people aware of that? How do you break that? I don't know. Obviously, the ones that are usually named are more severe, right? Racism and sexism certainly beat heightism and weightism, right? But it's like all those things throw our judgment off. Yeah.
Well, let's not forget age, because there's a whole discussion about ageism as well. So,
us old guys got to represent.
I know. And, because I'm 70 years old and a 20-year-old is my supervisor, there's a generational disparity there.
Yeah.
You know, and so much, even within our church, there's a generational gap there. You know, this is not the way we used to do it in the old age. Well, this is 2022 and you need to wake up is what I want to say. You know, come on, people. You know, everybody has to give a little.
Yep.
What you gonna say, Thomas?
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, the conversation has moved way past the point that I was going to make. And I'm kind of happy for it because I like the way it's going. Basically, my point was going to be that, yeah, James is right. 80% of our population, probably more, is in the center.
Yeah.
But we got 10% on each side that are driving the elections.
Right.
Because that disparity between the right and the left, it makes news. If you remember that old 1980s song from Huey Lewis, Dirty Laundry, we're living it right now.
Yep.
Yeah. Although it was Don Henley because it's one of my favorite songs, but yes.
Oh yeah, it was Don Henley.
Don Henley, man. He's the best. No, it's cool. It's cool. No, Dirty Laundry is so applicable even today. No question about it.
Even more so than that. At least I think so.
Oh yeah. No, the news media is in rough shape. But the thing is, like, go ahead.
Yeah, we got 10% on either side driving the news because that's what sells airtime on the news.
Yeah. Well, and it's gotten worse because there's so many 24/7 channels. Sorry. Yeah.
And we get the larger part of the population that doesn't know how to do research for themselves. And they're going to listen to whatever their preferred media source tells them without any knowledge of what's actually happening.
But you know, Thomas, I think part of that problem is that people are not willing to engage and to become informed. Like we're having these discussions. Who's here? Just us.
Yeah,
exactly.
Not that we are know all be all, but we can appreciate each other's conversation and what we bring to the conversation. But who's here? It's Thomas, Kevin, Cassie, James, Patrick, and Becky.
Yep.
Well, this is one of my biggest concerns because what's interesting is the world is open now, right? So one of the things I do whenever I see sound bites is I go watch the full footage, right? And so I did this during a lot of the discussions on defund the police. I watched hours and hours and hours of body cam and dash cam footage, and I watched cops get killed in the job. I invite you to do several hours of watching cops die in the line of duty and tell me that you need to defund them. You might want to augment it for more social skills and all that. I agree with that, but it's like that's one of the things that pushed me hard to the right is I watch endless hours of body cam footage. I watch like war footage. You know, when you hear about battles, I actually read the radio transcripts of those 4 people that Trump exonerated because I'm like I want to actually understand what the battle sequence was. So I read a couple hours worth of what actually happened. And so what's interesting is the source stuff is more available than it's ever been before. The question is who watches it. And my favorite example is I watched a 6-second clip of Biden saying something. And he sounded like a blaring buffoon in that 6 seconds. I stopped it. I said, I'm going to look this up. It was part of that 6-minute speech about the time he was at the pool and he called somebody a name. You listen to that 6-minute clip. That's a person of integrity. He ended up saying he's sorry. I'm not sorry for doing my job, but I'm sorry for calling you that name. He diffused that situation. My opinion of Biden went way up on that 6-minute clip because I refused to just listen to the 6-minute blah, 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 blah. Okay, he stumbled over his words 6 seconds. Like, who the hell doesn't, right? But it's like, when you can watch the full footage, there's a lot of truth in the world that you could not have gotten before. The challenge is, are people watching the 6 minutes of Biden talking about it? Are they watching the full body cam footage? Or are they watching the 6-second clip that's horrible? That's always the question. So you got to get people to actually, watch it. But we have more access to information than ever, so that's actually a good thing.
Right, and it's always about context. I always tell my students that too, because people get so involved in like the nitty gritty details. It's like how do we teach people how to interact and see the full picture instead of, oh my gosh, this person hit me, they said this, they said that, and I'm like, wow, like what? Like you're doing the same thing that you're seeing on TV because technology has shifted the way that we communicate with one another and how we interact and say, oh, if Judge and I have a dispute to work out, I'm not going to be like, I hate you, it's all your fault. It's how we come together and meet in the middle. But that's what this generation does. They're like, oh, well, you disagree with me, so I have to hate you, Miss Copeland. And I'm just sitting here like, what in the world? Like, if I had to do that with every person, like, well, I mean, look where we are now. But that's what people are reading. It's just kind of like, well, if I disagree with James, like we're rivals and we're enemies. And I'm kind of like, but that's dumb. Like, to me, it's like, it's just, it doesn't make sense, because it's just like, why don't we talk about it? How can we really come together and learn from it and actually promote the learning piece instead of the drama? Because the drama really fuels people. It's profitable. People are like, oh, like I like to see what's going on. And that's what generates the views and the interest, when instead it should be like what Becky was saying before. It really should be about the empathy piece, about like, I care about you as a person, James and Kevin. Like, I care about you. Let me invest my time and energy, not, oh, did you hear about this drama? He's a part of this party and that party.
Well,
it's like, that's what, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's
I'm with you. But the other question is like, can you get people to take action instead of it? Like, one of the things I say to anybody says, about stolen elections, which is one of the problems from my side in the current discussion. I say, have you ever actually gone down and volunteered with the registrar of voters? Like, there's always need for help. So what's interesting for a lot of these issues is there's always something you can do and you can influence it. And then I even look at like the pro-choice thing, like Becky was mentioning before. Now that Roe v. Wade's gone, it's interesting to observe how many red states have gone so pro-choice. But it's like, I even bring this up all the time. Like I said, I was at the Republican breakfast this morning with my pro-choice shirt on, and I was active in the political campaign too. That's why I was backing Themis, even though she got blown out by the Trump.
What did they say, James, when you walked in with that t-shirt?
Yeah, I know, right?
Love it. No, love it. So this is why I'm fairly optimistic about our political system. It corrects surprisingly well. So you look at Kansas. Kansas was a 15-point Trump state. They went 24 points pro-choice. That's a 39-point swing. Nothing swing 39 points in our society, right? Montana and Kentucky both had anti-abortion things on the ballot. Two very red states. Both went pro-choice. Whoa, dude, right? So when I tell people, I talk to Republicans, now we're Connecticut, right? So let's be realistic. I would say Connecticut Republican is an Idaho Democrat, right? But, when I talk to people, I say, okay, now that Roe v. Wade's gone, we all had to come out of the closet. What do you really think we should outlaw, abortion at conception, which would include half of the forms of birth control? No. Okay. Now I will say to the people on the hard left, healthy pregnancy 2 weeks before birth? No, not that either. We come down to 15, 20, 24, and 27 weeks. That's where the debate comes down to. And almost the large majority of the Republicans I know are perfectly fine with 15 weeks. Okay, that's where 92% of abortions already occur. Point is, we're not trying to get to that issue. Point is, you can influence it. So when I run around with this shirt, I get to have a lot of really interesting conversations. And I tell people, what's your number of weeks? Where do you draw the line? Now, it's like, take a position. And very few Republicans say conception. Very few say 6. Right? That's all down in South. The red states do that. Most people say, 15 or 20. I'm even saying 24 is too far along. There needs to be a damn good reason. Most people are somewhere between 15 and 24, which is largely where society was under Roe v. Wade. Europe, even very liberal Europe, is mostly at 15 weeks. So I tell that to all the Republicans. So point is, this issue is going to correct. The Republicans got spanked this election cycle, I believe, partially because of Roe and running too far to the right. But the point is, this is why I'm optimistic about electoral system. I'm watching it correct as a pro-choice Republican. Like, okay, yeah, you got Roe v. Wade overturned, and you smacked all these constitutional amendments. They got defeated all in these states. So it's just interesting.
But James.
Yeah.
But James, the same thing is happening with gay marriage. Why did the Senate have to pass that? What was it? 29 to 30 Republicans that voted to go with it.
Right, against gay marriage,
Yeah, and then also the issue of interracial marriages. Why are we going back to the 50s?
Yeah.
Why are we digging in the past with this stuff? So now gay marriage is codified. If they overturn it, then it's codified. So now what?
That's why you never end the fight.
Yeah.
There's always going to be people on all extremes.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, because I can tell you some of the stuff that really scares the right on the far left. So what's really cool about being a centrist is I pick a major party because you don't get anything done if you don't work with a major party. But which party you pick, if you're a centrist, half the time you're gonna be fighting with your own team. But it's like, the people who want to say, revert abortion, gay marriage, interracial marriage, like these things should be on the table. Like, how do you think of that clearly, like as an issue. How would you even solve that? But you go over the far left, it freaks out the right when you hear people say, yeah, you should allow people to have medical and surgical body alterations if they feel a different way at the age of 12,
Right.
because after the age of 12, you can no longer qualify to, for example, to be in the Olympics, which has now been ruled on. It's like, or when you say, you should be able to have an abortion 2 weeks before the birth. No, it's like you can go crazy on either side, and almost nobody's there that I know. Like most people, when you have a reasonable conversation, are somewhere in the middle. But you're right. The 30-something Republicans who said, yeah, no to interracial marriage. It's like, really? I don't know. You just got to keep fighting them.
But don't you think these things should like come down to education? I mean, like, if that's the thing that like, matters to you most, and that's the thing you want to fight for, and you've got people way to one side and way to the other side who say like, well, abortion's okay, but like not in the last 2 weeks of pregnancy. Like nobody ever comes out and is like, that is less than 1% of abortions.
I know.
There's no woman with a healthy fetus who at 36 weeks is, what, screw this, take this kid out of me and kill it. Like that doesn't happen. And it's like, nobody says this stuff. And like, there's an absence of knowledge of how women's bodies work, how the medical field works.
Yep.
So like we prey on people's worst fears without the education. And I feel like that's one of the most frustrating parts of this.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
Oh, yeah.
And Becky, that leads into the other part of the discussion of maternal mortality rates.
Yeah, especially in our country when we have a lot of hospitals and stuff, and yet like it was interesting. I think it was Mama Dr. Jones on YouTube. She actually went through, she's a medical OBGYN doctor, and she was going through saying like, Black, Indigenous, women of color, or people who have uteruses who are of that marginalized identity, like they'll have higher mortality rates, but it's like 0.003.
Right.
And like she was breaking down the statistics and everything. And it's just kind of sad that in our country, we don't really like talk, like you're saying, Becky and Judge, like about like, what's actually going on, and how like for abortion, it's like there's pills. You shove them up your hoo-ha, and then you take another pill by mouth. That's it. But
Yep.
yet there's this misconceived notion saying like, oh my gosh, like you're gonna have to be cut open and this and that. And I'm like, these like you're saying, Judge, this is not the 50s anymore. You don't use a coat hanger, you don't do all this stuff. There's chemicals and all sorts of other things involved. And the whole thing only takes like an hour or two. But like, how are you supposed to know that unless you researched it?
Exactly. And I attended a seminar earlier week on mortality rates, and it's like 80% of women of underserved, underprivileged women are having these maternity issues where they're not getting the maternity health they need, having these cesarean sections when they want to deliver vaginally, and it's just like, well, why aren't these people being served? That, they come from a community where the hospital facilities are not, if I tell you I'm in labor and I'm cramping and I'm having pain, I'm having pain and you need to do something to help me. Not tell me, no, don't worry about it. That's going to happen to you. As a healthcare professional, you should listen to what your patient is saying, not based on algorithms that you're clicking into the system to tell you, oh, she's just, she's African-American, so she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a woman of color and I'm telling you this doesn't feel right, my legs are getting numb and I can't feel my legs, then something's wrong.
Yeah.
Something is wrong.
Yeah. Serena Williams was talking about that too. Did you see her story?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and she had to fight with like the medical providers because they weren't believing that there was something wrong with her.
But she was
like,
telling
oh,
them.
fine.
Yeah.
And it's just like she's telling them like my legs, my heart, my chest, my this, and it took her like 50 attempts just for them to be like, oh, okay, we'll check it out. But it's like again, like that's at the intersection of being Black, Indigenous, woman of color, and then also the woman part being like, especially within the medical field. I know I've experienced that too. I go to the doctors and they literally don't believe your pain. And
exactly.
Sometimes it take 10 years for you to get a diagnosis. And I'm sitting here like, why didn't you believe me when I said my uterus hurts? Why don't you check it out and tell me what's going on? And it took 10 years. And they're like, oh, I think you were right. And I'm like, I knew I was right. I know my own body. But like, why are these doctors believing women?
Well, in 10 years, you could have been diagnosed with cancer of the cervix or something.
No, exactly. And that's like another issue within our medical society is what types of trainings are people provided with to help care for neurodiverse or physically disabled or Black people or Indigenous people, or, you know, if you start to put all these like different identities on it, it's like, what kinds of training and programs are they equipped with or lack thereof to serve these populations? Because I remember I've talked with even some medical providers and they were like, oh, I've never had to, you know, deal with someone like you. And I'm like, but what does that mean? Like, I'm here to be seen because I'm in pain or I'm sick or something. And it's like, what does that mean when it's just like, oh, well, I don't really know how to serve someone from your population. And it's like, so then if you don't know how to, and you're the expert, how are we going to help? Like you're saying, Judge, like, how are we going to help like you know, Black, Indigenous, women of color, or people with uteruses? How are we going to help them when they're in pain, when it's like, oh, well, I may not have the social or cultural context. And that's why it's so important to not only have representation, but to have people who either have lived through the experience or have that knowledge to help guide others through it. And I know it's an issue within the educational sphere, the political sphere, the healthcare. There's quite a few intersections when you start looking at it. Like there's quite a few intersections about not only representation, but then addressing each of the issues like within the parties, and how can we bridge that social and cultural gap? Because it's just like, just because I'm mixed race doesn't mean that James and I can't have something in common. It's like, you know, there are things across race, across class that people can connect and educate one another on. And yet here we are, it's kind of still, we're picking at the dust floating in the air, being like, well, I think it's dust.
But you know what, Cassie, that also speaks to the fact that, you know, you don't know each of these people's backgrounds on, like, for instance, on this call. You don't know who is in my family. I have white people in my family that we share views with, you know, and if you sit at my Thanksgiving table, you're going to see from Snow White to Black as Night. So, you know, it's crazy that we can have these conversations with people, or we can't sometimes too, with people in our families.
Yeah.
But the gist of my point is that you just don't know where people come from unless you have a discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And
to say, this is my background. This is my background. You know, now I don't know if technically I'm considered mixed race, but you know, I present as a person of color. But I have Latinos in my family and white people in my family. And you just don't know where people come from.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of preconceived notions.
We're all a little bit of something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, we all come from Africa if you go back far enough.
Yeah.
Don't tell certain people that. Well, it's funny because when we say where you're from, I don't even know how they do it. Like I've had my DNA done on like 23andMe, and they give you this map of your background. I'm always curious, how many generations do you go back? I happen to know some of my ancestry. My great-grandparents came over from Italy in the 19-teens, and they took a big right-hand turn, went 50 miles up to Watertown area, and that's why I'm here. And Northern Italian, that's why I'm blue. But yeah, no, and so I literally found their signatures in the manifest on Ancestry.com and stuff like that. It's kind of cool. But the you know, okay, say I'm Italian, but it's like, how far you go back? Like if you go back a few hundred years, yeah, but if you go 1,000 years, and I forget what it is. It's either 250,000 for one and 650,000 for the other. I forget which it is, but we're all from the same genetic mother and father at some point, and they both lived in Africa. So it's like, you know, it gets weird after a while. So it's like, yeah, whatever. We're all humans. Next.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all pink on the inside. You cut us open. There's red. There's pink. Like, yeah.
Heart's located in the same location on everybody.
Yes, it is. I mean, I'm Irish, Scottish, and American Indian.
Wow.
And
you still bleed red blood. There you go.
And some English.
Yep.
Actually, my great, and maybe a couple more greats, grandmother come over on Mayflower. The other half of my family come through Prince Edward's Island in the 1920s.
Wow.
So all right, so where do I fit?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
Or to give you another one, my mother told me from the time I was a little kid that I was 1/8 Native American and 1/8 German. And then when I had my DNA done, I was neither of those two. Like, do I feel like I lost
Yeah,
something? I'm like, I don't know. Whatever.
23andMe basically said the same thing to me. So,
Yeah. You find out a lot on there.
yeah, and I don't even know where they got the Welsh from, but but yeah, I mean, we're all, and this, I guess, goes back to the globalization part of it.
Yeah.
We're no longer individual races.
Right.
In 200 years or 300 years, we're going to be one race. It's eventually going to happen. We're going to be a human race. May as well start it. I mean,
Yeah.
at least
Yeah.
that's my viewpoint.
I'm with you. My
I
question
mean,
would be,
I'm no more black.
You're black, Thomas. I see it.
All right. In 200 years, my ancestors will be no more black than yours.
Right.
We're gonna be the same race. We're gonna eventually merge into the same human race. So we may as well start it.
I see it, Thomas. You're already black. I see it. You,
there you go.
James, you're black. I see it in you, James, and Becky.
All
What's
right,
interesting?
So
well,
maybe I need to turn my camera back on.
there you go.
There you go.
Well, South
See,
Park did an
look at
episode.
you.
Yeah, South Park did an episode in the future where everyone was a medium shade of brown. But the bad part about that episode is everybody still found something to fight about. So it's like nothing got
Yes.
better in the future. It was just a different set of issues because nobody could fight over skin color anymore.
Wasn't
Yeah,
that Futurama?
exactly.
That might have been the episode. They just did good stuff.
Yeah.
But they also had one on atheism, and everyone abandoned all religions, and then all the biologists and chemists and physicists started fighting with each other. So everyone was taking sides in the science war. So all their future things, nothing ever gets better. So we got to learn to get along no matter what, because there's always something.
Oh, exactly. I get the same atheism problem because I'm one of evidently the very, 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 very few atheist conservative Republicans.
Yeah, me too. Welcome aboard. That's how we ended up on the
Hey,
Human
now
Relations
there's
Commission.
two of us. Cool.
Two against the
And
world, man.
I think Cassie and I were having a conversation that I told her, I'm not going to put her out there on blast, but I told her that I am spiritual, but I'm not religious.
Same.
You know, I don't have to be in church 365 days a year to understand what spiritual guide is and what works for me. So I'm not there every time this church doors swing open. And I'm not going to be at this age. You know, it's like I barely can get up out of the bed without some kind of ache or pain. So it's just like, if I don't feel like going, I'm not going.
Right.
I get crucified by both Republican and Democrat extremists.
Right.
And I'm going to call it what it is. And when I say I'm an atheist conservative, that doesn't exist. You can't be that. You can't be both.
Wow.
And it's like, dude, who the hell are you to judge?
Yeah, that's a society.
Except for you,
movement.
you're a judge. I mean,
Yeah, it's sad that that's the society we live in, where it's just like, oh, well, you have to be, you know, and as James and Thomas, you were talking, it's like, oh, well, we have to, you know, be in these boxes, and like society's moving away from, oh, well, check off your race, check off your class, check, you know, how we check those boxes for
We are.
applications or for other things. And it's like, we're moving away from that. And yet we live in a society where every day it's like we're judging, we have that psychology of like, did I check the box of like for this part? Some people are living it out more than others, and everyone's feeling the effects from it, where it's like, oh, I'm going to go based off of my perception and my judgment and my values. And it's just kind of like, but why are we doing this so hardcore? Because at the end of the day, when you really get to know one, it's like even though we're all strangers, like we're all like potentially friends we haven't met yet, or we're potentially colleagues or coworkers, or there's always a way to connect. again, like it's just something to think about, because I always think about that too, like with like being multiracial, and how like I was looking into the how the United States is one of a couple of countries that has interracial marriage. Like in China, it's not allowed. You're not allowed to marry outside of your race, but yet there's a shortage of women because they killed like a whole entire generation of women because they weren't valued as much, like as babies. Like I remember, and this was in the late 90s or so. And it's kind of like, so there's all of these men or seemingly presenting males in China who are like, but then who are you going to date? How are you going to continue notion of boxes? And you can date someone who's outside or American, but wait, it's illegal, so you can't get married. It's just like this whole mind-boggling. So I'm like, how is your country growing?
There's no uterus for them.
Well, I don't, it's interesting when we think about interracial marriage and stuff, and I'm like, oh, it's put back on the table. But like, as y'all were saying, it's like, well, we're moving towards the human race. But thinking about certain countries, like some countries really aren't, which is really sad. Like if you look over,
Yeah, I mean, there's no, exactly. There's no, and you can't breed your own. Incest is not best. So, come on now.
Right.
What are you
And
gonna do?
since being gay is not a choice,
Okay.
if you're in China, right? If it was a choice, it'd be seen as just how the demographic imbalance between males and females.
Exactly.
In China, right?
yeah.
It's like, no, it's a tough situation. Well, China's on the verge of demographic collapse. That's why when people say China's a threat to the United States or whatever, it's not even close. The country's falling apart. Their hyperinflation for the last 30 years is also just destroying their economy. It's all hollow. And then Russia's self-destructing in Ukraine. It's like, suddenly the United States, we have a whole bunch of troubles. But if again, even Bill Maher said this, and he's on the left, but he loves to pick on anybody when there's a hole. And he said, you know what? It's like, if you think America's screwed up, you should go around the world for a little while. There's some seriously big problems in terms of people starting
And I've
wars.
seen them. Trust me.
Yeah, you go exactly. Well, I saw that when I was abroad a bit. Like I was in Turkey when I was in the military. Our trash we were throwing out of the back of the truck. They were catching it in midair. Our MRE boxes, that cardboard is so strong. They would make their houses out of MRE boxes. And we would, and I remember that. And I was on Facebook like 15 years later, and I posted something on Facebook about, I remember in Turkey how poor they were. And a friend of mine, I just didn't realize how other people were influenced by it too, because you're a bunch of young macho guys, you're supposed to, not be impervious and not care about it, right? But he said, I remember that. That was incredible how dirt poor they were, that our trash was their housing material. Like, wow. So yeah, it can be a lot worse.
I was in Jamaica.
It's like what we take for granted, other nations would, gladly benefit from.
Yeah.
I was in Jamaica a few years ago, and we were there as a tour, and rich white Americans, and were enjoying, red stripes and river rafting down the White River, but getting from the cruise ship to the river, there's houses, they've got corrugated metal, and that's like 3 of their 4 walls.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you don't see that side of it. All the American tourists see is, okay, all these guys are up here begging me for money. Well,
And,
they have no idea the difference.
That happens. I went to Mexico recently. I had to go to
Mexico. The same way.
If you go to Tijuana, it's just like it's just like being attacked by mosquitoes. It's like, back up, kid. I'm trying to get over the bridge. Okay.
Yep. Amazing.
You want to buy? That's all I heard. You want to buy? You want to buy?
Exactly.
Yeah, good little entrepreneurs. I remember that too. Okay, question. I was going to shift gears a little bit if I could to some of the issues that are really, really, really hard to solve at global scale, right? So just per the theme of the discussion. So some of them we can solve, right? So like I've been openly supportive of gay marriage like back in the 90s. And people I knew who were saying, oh, bad. I'm like, what do you care? It's their choice. Come on. It was easy to make an argument for that. You can join your local commission. You can do local things. You can get involved in the political party, and you can mouth off at the breakfast and find out how many Republicans there really are. But it's like, like the plastics one is a big one for me because, I'm into science and chemistry and all that stuff. And so it's like, you look at the effect of plastics, you look at the years of the biodegradation. It's like, how do you start affecting that? Not just the plastics one, but there are a handful of issues where it's like, I can help influence the educational system. I go in on career day and I go in for chess club and I help the kids learn, some things. Hopefully that's a good fun life skill or whatever. How do you start to affect that? And then like, what are the other 5 or 6 major like ones that you look at and you're like, damn, I like to help, but wow, that's hard to do. Like nuclear proliferation. How much do you personally influence that? Just to pick the 2 that were mentioned at the beginning of the call. Those are the ones that worry me. Like, gay marriage. Hey, I'll fight for it every time I find someone who says it's a bad thing. That's like, come on, leave them alone. What do you care? No, you don't want people messing with your marriage. That one's easy. How do you stop the plastics things? How do you stop nuclear war? Those are the tough ones.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, especially with plastic because it's so widespread now. And thinking back from like the 60s through the 80s, thinking about when it was starting to come about, and it's like I think we're really facing the repercussions because plastic can cause it not just like a lot of harm to the environment, but like a lot to our bodies. Like if you we consume like if you drink a water bottle like from plastic water bottle, you consume like a credit card's worth amount of plastic in your body, and your body can't break down plastic. Sorry, we can't break down the dinosaurs that it was made out of, but like it's bananas to think about because it's kind of like so how do we? And I think a part of that comes from changing the local ecosystem, starting to compost, stop using plastic, starting to go against a lot of these companies saying like, hey, can we have metal or glass, or finding other sustainable solutions and materials to use, but then also putting it within capitalism, because there's something called eco-capitalism. It's really fascinating if you look into it, and it really blends of like showing like how you can take environmental action and blend it in and then make it not only profitable but also help the environment and the local community. And it's really making that widespread, like learning about landfills. There's a huge one in Hartford. You drive by it on the highway.
Yep.
They also have incinerators. And how does that impact the air we breathe? But why can't we have garbage or trash that is compostable?
Yeah.
But that all,
we know it. Yeah.
But that all comes back down to education. I mean, like, we, sitting here having this discussion have done that work, and we're willing to put in the work to make those changes ourselves. But one of the fallacies like we've been taught is like, we as consumers are responsible for making this change. We can make small changes as the consumers, but like it's these enormous corporations like causing the majority of this. And so there needs to be, there has to be legislative change. So like it has to be, consumers banding together and demanding better. On top of us doing those things, like I always opt for the glass or the metal option or, zero packaging options. And, every year I try and come up with a new way to wrap my kids' gifts so I'm not wasting like wrapping paper, like, the little random stuff. But like these are, that's the small potatoes stuff. Like you need to look globally, and you need these corporations to stop doing stuff. Part of the awful plastics problem is fast fashion and all of the crappy fabrics people use, and the amount of stuff people buy and then throw away that then gets shipped to other countries, but that stuff is so crappy that even they don't want it, and it ends up being, going to a landfill or incinerated. Like those are issues. And I can, on my own, I can say, okay, well, I'm not buying any more clothing made of synthetic fabrics, but I'm one person. What's that good? Like I can feel better and snotty about myself and be like, well, if my clothing ever gets buried, at least it'll break down in the ground. Your jeans made of plastic bottles will not.
Right.
So, but what good does that do anybody? It doesn't do anybody any good. Education.
And exactly, Becky. And the question that, using water as an example, there's a choice economically because everybody can afford to go to glass to spend money for glass water.
Yeah.
Then you have the thing with, okay, do I drink the water out of the plastic bottle, or do I drink the maybe lead poison water out of the tap?
Yeah. Yeah.
which could give me something else and I could develop cancer from, but I can also develop cancer from the plastic bottle. You know, it's like, pick what is the less tools?
Right. Yeah.
Comes down to education. How many people still realize that Flint hasn't had their water fixed? You know,
Yeah.
we want to talk about this and like plastic bottles. How many people still care that Flint doesn't have clean water?
Right.
I was actually going to make a sarcastic comment about Flint's water, but yeah, now we'll just leave it alone.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, an interesting thing though, and I hate to say this, right, and it's controversial. I'll say it, and I'm saying this with love. And I think Becky, you're a great mother, and it's wonderful you have 5 kids. But the number one thing you can do to save the planet is stop breeding humans. And I'm not trying to pick on Becky. I breeded 2 of them myself. But what's interesting is if you look at every way you can actually influence the overall impact of humanity on the planet, almost nothing has a shift in impact like birth rate. And so if you look at most societies, as they come up the wealth curve, they go way down on the kid curve. And a large percentage, if not a majority of countries now are at below the 2.1 replacement rate. So the argument is the 14 billionth person will never be born. Because even though like in the 1960s, there's only 3 billion people, there's 8 billion people. And now you look at the curve, it's like, oh, we're going to destroy the planet. But when you look at the ability to curve the population, it's okay. And so part of my question is things like on the pro-choice front and on the ability to, birth control is really, really cheap if people are willing to fund it and ship it. If you reduce the number of humans, you reduce the amount of red meat eaten, you reduce the amount of polyester shirts worn, just to go down everything you can advocate doing better as a person, you could do even better if you didn't have more people. And I know that gets into like genetic engineering on a global scale, but it's like, it does. It's just to put that mechanism out there.
But James, are you saying there should be no next generation?
Everyone should have the freedom to make whatever choice they want. So I'm certainly not arguing for anything genocidal in nature, obviously, right? So that's sick and twisted. But where I'm going is if people have the choice to control their own reproductive behavior, and you make access to birth control really easy, and you start sex education at 4 years old, like we did with our kids, and you say, now our kids will probably have the standard 2.1 because that's kind of what happens in the United States. But it's like at a global scale, if people have access to birth control, have access to abortion, especially if it's the medical abortion for the first 12 weeks or so, and you can curb the population aggressively, that actually would help the planet more than just about any other single action you could take.
But that's like saying, okay, now we're becoming China. You can only have 2.1 kids.
I wouldn't mandate it though. That's the one thing I want to differentiate, right? That was a mandate. I would sell it. Hey, this is a condom. Use one every time. I say it facetiously, but listen, as a libertarian, I don't want anybody ordered to do anything. Do whatever the hell you want. But as a libertarian, I'll say, I get to also advocate things. Can you please use birth control? Look, here's some morning after pills. Here's how they work.
Yeah.
I mean, you could really help the planet substantially if you can curb the population in a voluntary way.
Oh, so are you saying, okay, we're getting rid of plastics, then we need to get rid of condoms?
I know, right? Yeah. Unless
Pick your
synthetic ones, they make eco green ones now out of like other material. It's really interesting.
Yeah,
like,
lambskin.
they got a Facebook ad.
But they may break certain men out, Cassie.
I know.
Yeah, you
It's
get
like,
lambskin.
Yeah,
That's
it's a new pickup
green,
line. Hey, baby, my condoms break down
guess.
in the environment. So
Vasectomy, gentlemen, vasectomies.
Oh,
Yeah.
Hey.
So now you're trying to snip it, Becky? Is
hell
that
yeah, I've been there.
That is very low waste.
yeah.
It's been listen, man. They talk about how when women have sexual empowerment, it was the weirdest feeling. I got my vasectomy for the first time in my life. I couldn't get anyone pregnant. I'm like, that was surprisingly liberating. It was a really weird, and I'm happily committed to my wife, but the one person I couldn't get pregnant was my wife. So I'm like, yay! It was actually really empowering to get a vasectomy. It's kind of cool.
Did she feel empowered after you got a vasectomy, though? Did she feel empowered?
She's looking at me now like, how are you telling people this? I don't even know. It's like, listen, my body, my choice to tell people. Anyway.
We're all family, Mrs. Madison. We're all family.
There you go. I'll let her know.
And it's all out there on the internet where nobody's ever gonna forget it.
I'm keenly aware of that. I'm a very open person.
Yeah, and honestly, it's good that people talk about it because people always talk about like women or people with uteruses for contraception, and no one talks about like, well, what about male contraception or people who have those parts for the contraception? It's just interesting to think about how in society we push certain responsibilities on certain perceived genders or perceived like genitalia and stuff, and it's just like it's mind-boggling to think. And then also to think about Roe v. Wade and how like a part of that is like also the contraception piece, which is coming up because I know Once that got overturned for healthcare access, then there's LGBTQ marriage rights. And then that's the next one is access. And like we were talking about before, James, about like, if people could have access, I think a lot of people would make different choices. But like you're talking about, Kevin, it's kind of like, but how do people get that? Like, I know at University of Connecticut, they give out condoms for free, but not every school does. Like,
I thought most colleges did, and I thought most high schools did.
Most of
But
them,
again,
not
it
all.
comes down to takes two to play,
Exactly.
and both parties need to take responsibility.
Or else you'll end up like a candidate like Herschel Walker, who says, I didn't pay for an abortion.
Herschel Walker doesn't remember what he did yesterday.
Yeah, well, you know.
So,
But Trump said he'd be a
and
good senator, so
I'm a diehard Republican, and I'm going to say Herschel Walker was not the candidate.
I felt bad for Republicans because that was the best candidate they could come up with in Georgia. I was like, oh, that's just.
Is this all you got? Right, Becky? Is this all you got?
Oh, Stacey Abrams did more for us than Herschel Walker did.
No. We deserve to have a crappy election.
Yeah, that was just sad. Just sad.
That was lame. But now I know a lot about I didn't know that vampires and that werewolves and that whole interaction thing. So now I'm clear on that because of Herschel Walker. So
no, definitely. Is that werewolves?
You don't know that? He went on vampires and werewolves. Oh, watch the Obama response. Obama started talking about that one. It was funny as hell. Obama. You look up Obama looking out. Yeah. Oh, but I love Obama. I miss him so much. He was the classiest president in my lifetime. And he starts buzzing on Herschel Walker.
Yeah. Cassie, would you like to move us forward? Because we're getting close to
That's
the end.
Okay. Yes, we are getting close to time. So our final
let's get off condoms, okay? And contraceptives and talking about
and werewolves and
me.
Hey, you know what? It's coming up, so definitely keep an eye out on the different legislation and things coming up. And if you want to be involved with any of the topics that you heard of, I implore you to do more research. So for the viewers who are out there listening, like do more research. Try to find different credible sources. Also go to your library. There are physical books that you can read, or you can have a guide to go to with.
If they're not banned, Cassie.
That's true too. But also you can change your VPN and go to other places on the internet. But that's a whole other conversation for cybersecurity and technology. Again, we hit a lot of different topics for this event. It's not all encompassing because it's impossible to talk about every single issue. But I appreciate the conversation that was had with everyone today. So
but are we going to have a conversation on werewolves?
Yes, I know.
Vampires.
Yeah. And
that's kind of where I'm going.
So I'm going to wrap this up with my favorite commissioners. I just love you all. Thank you so much for being here. And I just invite our audience and all our listeners out there to join us for our next conversation scheduled for December 18th, which is we'll have a discussion on Native American Indigenous people. And I just have to say a special shout out and thank you for understanding Mrs. Madison.
I will let her know.
We didn't mean to put your personal business out there, about your husband, but now, just like Commissioner Hayes says, it's all over the internet, so we can't help that.
All right. I'm trying to empower all those men out there who want to make their own reproductive choices.
There you go.
Hey, there we go, James.
Make it right, James. Make it right. Make it right. So with that,
I nominate James for a sex ed class at the high school.
Honestly, you need to know options.
There you go.
Okay.
All right. Every man should know his options.
Okay, we're going to wrap this up and get off the prophylactic discussions and the comments. And I hope everyone will join us next Sunday.
Yes.
18th again. What is the time, Cassie?
1 to 3 p.m. So same time as this event. It's virtual. Please click on the link to be able to register online. It's going to be a great conversation. We're going to talk about colonization and decolonizing our minds.
And we'll see you, but hopefully before Christmas. And speaking for my commissioners, we wish you all a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, happy whatever you're celebrating. It's great. And we'll see you then. Thank you.
We have a meeting this week.
All right,
Woo,
thank
yes.
you.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a
And we have a
meeting
meeting this
this week, Commissioners, so don't forget, Patrick will be sending out the itinerary.
Yes, please.
Yes, and it's also can be found online on our website. So if you want to check out the things that we discuss about in our meetings, or if you have any suggestions, we do have a public communications portion. So feel free to go to the Town of Windsor Human Relations Commission website and the Town of Windsor main website if you'd like to see our agendas and notes.
And all our conversations, just like this one, will be on YouTube.
Yes.
Awesome.
Until next time, see you next time. Thank you
All
for
right,
joining
thanks.
this
All right.
podcast.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.